Welcome to Snipe Life, where we look at creativity through the lens of Christianity, and today we're taking a look at God's Not Dead, one of the most successful and popular Christian franchises of the last decade. Alright, so the original movie, God's Not Dead, came out in 2014. The basic premise of the movie is that a student, Josh Wheaton, goes to college in his freshman year and takes a philosophy class. His professor, Professor Radisson, then challenges the class to write on a piece of paper, "God is dead," and then sign their name. This is a way of him progressing past a certain portion of the class that would deal with God and trying to disprove or prove God overall. And so he's trying to skip that part of the class and basically not have to deal with the whole God situation. But Josh is not willing to sign the paper, and so, as a punishment, Professor Radisson makes him speak in front of the class, trying to prove the existence of God. Over the next 3 weeks, Josh has 3 attempts to try to convince the class that God does exist, and he refutes the things that the professor is saying overall about God. Of course, being the Christian movie that it is, at the end of the movie, he eventually does convince the class that God is not dead, and that they should maybe pursue more of an understanding of who God is. And this being the basic premise is pretty good. But overall, there's so much more to this movie than that, including a Muslim girl who is dealing with her Christian faith and not telling her family about it, or a journalist who is dealing with, well, basically the worst year of her life. And a lot of other stuff that's kind of going on, a lot of other storylines that are mixed in throughout. So there's a lot to talk about here, and I'm not going to talk about all of it in this video. There's just way too much, but we're going to break it down into some certain parts. So first, let's talk about the good. But real quick before we jump in, I wanted to tell you that this episode is sponsored by our patrons. They are our amazing community that really keeps everything afloat for us. And in fact, if you sign up for our Patreon in the next 2 months into May, then you'll actually get this notebook for free. So we're going to be sending out this customized notebook that's got our logo on the back and some nice scripture on the side here. But that's going to be a great book for you to write down any dreams or poems or songs or just thoughts about scripture that you may have. But if you sign up, we'll give you that. And we have a bunch of extra content on there as well, including interviews from much of the cast and crew of The Chosen, a really fun time that we had in Washington, D.C., and much more to come. Extra videos, early videos, and even helping us to decide what we want to make next. You can sign up for as little as $5 a month. I mean, think about it. You're just like buying me a coffee, right? Or you can go all the way up to $25 a month and get some extra perks, including Snipe Life apparel. Signing up shows us that you really care about what we're doing here and that you want to support our ministry so we can reach more people for the gospel. Anyway, back to the video. Thanks so much for watching. Now remember, I haven't seen this movie since 2014 when I watched it in theaters, so it's been a long time. And I remembered the plot, but I didn't remember all of the intricacies that went into this movie. But the strongest point of this movie for me is Josh Wheaton's podiums, the times that he's going to stand in front of the class and prove the existence of God. He has 3 really unique arguments that really help to understand what we believe about God and how we can kind of see the existence of God through science and through some other reasonings. So podium number 1, he focuses on the creation narrative and the understanding that science does prove that God could have created the universe, that the Big Bang, as people look at it, could very well be God saying, "Let there be light." To which Professor Radisson comes back and talks about Stephen Hawking and how he doesn't believe that there's God, so why should all of us? If he's so much smarter than us, then why wouldn't we listen to him? In podium number 2, Josh comes back and goes back to that Stephen Hawking quote. He talks about how it's circular reasoning and how it doesn't really make sense if you say it. You could use anything in place of God or creation and it wouldn't make any sense. It's just circular reasoning. But then he jumps over to evolution and begins speaking about that as well. And podium number 3 for me is probably the most interesting. Josh begins his conversation by talking about evil and why God would allow evil to exist. But then he jumps into moral relativism and the idea of moral implications in the world. Because if we don't believe in a God, there is no moral standard, right? There's nothing to hold us accountable for what we're doing.
It's a very simple question, Professor. Why do you hate God?
Because he took everything away from me. Yes, I hate God. All I have for him is hate.
How can you hate someone if they don't exist?
And it's at the end of this podium that we see all the students stand up and say God is not dead. Every single one of them, which is interesting to me, but yeah, that's the way it went. I also really like the overall idea of the movie itself. The fact that a student could stand up to a professor and show that they truly do love Christ no matter what, even if they're being threatened with a bad grade or failing a class. I really like that idea overall, and I think it inspires me to think about what I would do in that situation. And the best side story for me is actually the Muslim side story with Aisha. So it's really interesting to see how that family dynamic grows over the movie. You see a little bit of it, not too much, but you see the culmination of it with Aisha being kicked out of the house and not allowed to come back. This is extremely realistic. I actually went to university with a Muslim who had become a Christian, and his family was so upset at him that his father actually had a gun to his head, threatening him to kill him unless he came back to Islam. And it became a very serious thing for him, obviously. He had to run away from his family and basically never return. And so you see a similar thing here with Aisha, as her father holds his hand around her neck, getting ready to harm her, but then just locks her out of the house. Overall, I think that this movie is actually better than I remember, and a lot of these side stories help to keep the movie going and help the story beats a bit. But that's pretty much all I have for the good side of things. There are a lot of things that irritate me about this movie. As a Christian, and especially as a Christian creative, I really hold a high standard to Christian productions and to Christian creativity in general. Whether it's a song, a poem, or a movie, or even a show, then I really want it to be the best it can possibly be. Because if we're serving the Creator, the most creative being that has ever existed, that will ever exist, right? Then us being a part of that relationship with Him, we should have access to that creativity. We should have access to that talent and ability that allows us to be the most creative, the best creatives on the planet. And so holding us to that high standard, there are some things wrong with this movie. But rather than digging into this movie and tearing it apart for every bad acting decision or every bad graphical moment, I would rather focus on one phrase that really stuck out to me as I was watching this movie, and that is that it is a caricature of reality. So let me look at 3 characters in this movie to really explain what I mean by that. Let's first start with Kara, who is Josh Wheaton's girlfriend. In the beginning of the movie, we see as Josh and Kara go to school together. They're finally freshmen in college. They've decided to go to the same college so that they can be with each other. And as they get into class, we have these different conversations. The first conversation that we really see them having is in the lunchroom as they're getting lunch and talking about this whole thing with Professor Radisson and what's going to happen in his philosophy class. Kara is vehemently against what Josh wants to do, which is prove the existence of God, or at least try in that classroom. And she is extremely controlling to the point where he tries to get a dessert from the lunch menu, but she actually puts it back for him, not even asking him what his opinion is. Kara is the quintessential controlling, overbearing girlfriend that just doesn't have anything to do with what you want and is only concerned with what she wants and what she deems to be the correct decisions in the relationship. This becomes a problem because in the characterization of Kara, she becomes a caricature of reality, meaning that she is an overblown version of what we should see in reality, which in turn makes everything that she does not believable. The second interaction that we see with Kara and Josh actually is a lot better. She comes back to him, kind and sweet, apologizing. It's actually their anniversary. They've been together for 6 years. Let's keep that in mind. But as the conversation continues, Josh accidentally drops his books. And these books are not the books that he was supposed to have for the day, but rather philosophy books and books about God. Now, Kara, who is supposed to be a Christian, I guess, really gets angry at Josh. And she is not happy that he's even pursuing this at all. She basically walks away from the conversation extremely upset. And then the third and final conversation that we see Kara and Josh having is after he has done his first podium. So after he has defended God for the first time in the classroom, him and Kara meet outside the classroom and she breaks up with him because he's defending God. But she's supposed to be a Christian, right? Like, I'm so confused by this. I don't really understand what her character was supposed to do. I think overall it's just supposed to create a rough dynamic for Josh so that it seems like his life is harder, like because he's choosing God, it's becoming harder for him, or Satan's trying to put things in his way. I'm not 100% sure, but shouldn't a girlfriend that's been with you for 6 years not really care like that you're defending God in a philosophy class? I mean, to be honest, she should be helping him, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems illogical that this would be the outcome, that within a week, she goes from, I love you, happy 6-year anniversary, to, oh, you're going to speak about God in a philosophy class? Okay, well, we're done then. She just ends the relationship because she's not getting her way. It really seems like a relationship like this would not have lasted 6 years to begin with. The next example is Amy Ryan. This one's a little bit crazy. So Amy, living in the same city that everybody else lives in, living in the same area that everybody else lives in, just happens to be the only one whose power went out the night before, meaning that her alarm clock, well, doesn't go off. She wakes up late and has to rush to her next meeting, which happens to be with the guy from Duck Dynasty.
Right, I ain't aiming nothing. Whatever I see and I aim at, I shoot. When I shoot it, I kill it, and then I eat it.
So you do kill those ducks?
Of course I do. What we gonna do, cook them while they're still moving around? That would be cruel.
That'd be bad. So this isn't an act. You're actually proud of what you do.
Of course I am. Why would I do it if I'm not proud of it?
As she's rushing to get ready and to heat up her coffee in the microwave, she goes outside and sees that her car has been broken into, and specifically her GPS has been stolen. Now, there is a quick moment here that most people probably missed, but this actually tells us a lot about her character in general. She has 3 bumper stickers on the back of her car. The first one saying, "Meat is murder," the second one saying, "American humanist," and the last one saying, "I love evolution." A caricature of reality. Someone who is so far and above what the norm would be. And yes, I do understand that people like this exist, but it is the extreme, right? It is the extreme level of wanting to advertise all of these things just to get a rise out of people. But with this situation in particular, it's not even her personality or her beliefs that make it the most unbelievable. It's everything that's happening to her. In one single day, her car gets broken into. She's the only person that loses power in her house. She gets cancer at the end of the day, and then her boyfriend breaks up with her. There is so much that happens in this one time period for her that it just makes it so unbelievable, and you have no buy-in to who she is, so you don't even feel bad for her. You just see it happening. And last but certainly not least, the biggest example of this caricature of reality is Professor Radisson. This one was pretty hard for me to swallow. Even the premise of a professor saying that his students had to write "God is dead" and sign it in a classroom is pretty hard for me to see, although maybe it's believable. Maybe it has happened at other colleges throughout the United States. However, going beyond that, many of the things that Professor Radisson does throughout this just seem way too over the top. Even beginning with right after the first podium, Professor Radisson feels like he is being challenged, and so his alpha male personality kind of takes over, and he basically physically attacks Josh in the hallway after the podium, threatening him with a career suicide. Then after this, the most prominent area where we see Professor Radisson is actually with his girlfriend, Mina. And this one gets a little bit weird. Radisson and Mina have a really weird relationship. Radisson himself is this elitist intellectual who sees everyone else around him as, well, idiots, including Mina. And on top of all of that, she professes to be a Christian, while he is obviously an emphatic anti-theist. Mina is helping him get ready for a dinner party that they're having with the philosophy department from the college itself. But in this conversation, there's really something weird that happens, and I'm not sure why this is in the movie at all. You see, Professor Radisson actually taught Mina in class, and in her freshman year, he saw her and instantly lusted after her. I don't know. It was a very weird conversation. I don't know what this really adds to the movie, other than it makes Professor Radisson seem more creepy and more of a villain than he did already.
I can't help it. See, that my intellectual rigor falls to pieces the instant I get around you.
Really? You could have fooled me. The first time I walked into your classroom, you were all blood and thunder.
Kept trying to keep my eyes off you. Look, as it was, I waited until you aced the midterm.
Then, as the last straw, we actually get to see this dinner party with the philosophy department, who, of course, none of them are Christians. But Mina tries to stand up for herself a couple different times. But within all of it, it just turns out really, really bad. And at the end of it, she actually ends up leaving her own house as the dinner party is going on. This whole scene to me was just so unbelievable. Literally, like, not believable. Because this whole philosophy department, it seemed like they were villains from a movie. The only things that they were missing was the twirling mustache, right? I don't know, it just seemed so not believable to me. But that seemed to be the case with Radisson all over.
It's time for the help to depart.
In one moment, he'd be so fixated on being the alpha male in the situation and dominating the conversation with Josh. And then in the next moment, he's revealing like his deepest, darkest secrets from when his mom died when he was 12. It doesn't immerse me like I want it to. It doesn't bring me into the story and make it believable. It shows to me that there is a point to be made here. And that's all that this movie is good for, making that point. It's almost as if this movie was written by a non-believer writing about how a believer would perceive atheists to be. And so I truly think that that is this movie's biggest issue, is that the characters are just not believable. Now, there are some that are more than others. Like, for example, Josh Wheaton. He is a pretty good character overall. I think the growth throughout the story is pretty good. But even within his story, there are things that just don't make sense, right? He's been dating this girl for 6 years, and she breaks up with him over a philosophy class, right? But we don't see any consequence from that at all. We don't see any of his turmoil or his hurt. He just moves on and immediately does not care at all. If I was dating someone for 6 years, my entire life, basically from middle school until college, I would be hurt. I would be really, really hurt. And there would be consequences to that, right? But in this movie, there is absolutely none. And that's what I mean by not believable, because we don't fully see the picture of what should be believable characters. And now I love that I get to talk about this in 2022, because specifically, we see a great example of this in The Chosen. We can look at several different scenes within The Chosen and see the parallels between God's Not Dead and The Chosen. The same ideas, but executed very differently. Every time there is an interaction in The Chosen, it feels visceral. It feels real. When people are hurting, you can feel that emotion. When people are excited, you're smiling and laughing along with them. When we see scenes like the scenes with Eden and Simon Peter, there's a vast difference between that scene and, let's say, the scene with Professor Radisson and Mina.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, hey, did you pick up the bottle of wine I wanted?
I did. I left it in the car.
It's in the car. Don't worry about it. You have a lot on your plate.
And fishing on holy days without even thinking about it, with no respect for our God.
What about pikuach nefesh? We can break a commandment to save a life. Our lives are at stake
You
here.
don't know that because you have not pursued the Lord lately.
It's meaningful. It doesn't feel weird. There's not extra content that doesn't matter. Every word is purposeful. It's not just there to be there. And because of this, because we see the consequences of things, because we see the hurt, because we see the excitement, because we see the realness of people, it feels real. But within God's Not Dead, it doesn't. And so I think that harms what the movie was trying to do. And truthfully, I think that's really important for us to understand as well, that this movie has no consequences, that there's nothing that comes after this point, right? In fact, the worst example of this is Professor Radisson dying at the end of the movie, and literally nobody cares, right? Like, yes, we have a pastor who prays with him and, you know, he accepts Christ and, you know, is going to go to heaven, I guess. But within all of this, it's extremely weird, right? Like, think of the next 24 hours of all of these people's lives. Mina, who just broke up with her boyfriend, he dies, right? So she's in turmoil again. She has just given her life to God, and yet the man that she's been in love with for so long is just dead. All of the kids who were in that classroom with Professor Radisson, they just had this big moment where all of them stood up against him, and tomorrow they come in and the class is no more, right? Or they have a new teacher or something happens, right? But we don't get any answers to that. That's crazy, right? Like, this is such a crazy thing that happens at the end of the movie. And while I appreciate the subversion of expectations, it's also like, what are the consequences of this? But we don't see that because at the end of the movie, the only thing that we see is the concert with the Newsboys, right? Which, by the way, we have an amazing friend of the channel, one of our patrons, Sandy Frankenstein, and her son is actually in the Newsboys. He's actually right here. All in all, I think that this movie is actually pretty good. It's not horrible. There are some issues that I have with it, but it is better than I remembered it. It's better than I thought it was going to be. Just like many other Christian productions, it holds the same tropes and stereotypes as a lot of them, and has the same problems as well. But within this movie in particular, the caricature of reality is just too much for me. It makes it unbelievable. It really does feel like I'm watching a Christian movie, not being enthralled by a story. And while there are other issues with this movie that I'm just not going to get into today, that's the biggest one that I have. So I hope you like this understanding of God's Not Dead and kind of how I think about Christian creativity as a whole. But anyway, I hope you like this video. Thanks for being part of our community, and we'll see you on the next one.